Hi, I'm Lloyd Morgan, and I'm going to be discussing the Russian Revolution today. I'm going to explore its key causes, the immediate effects of it, and the actual detailing what actually occurred to make the revolution possible, and the revolution in itself. First of all, we'll go over a little background on Tsarist Russia in the years leading up to the revolution of 1917. For almost 200 years before the revolution, the country had been controlled by a monarchy, with the king, or Tsar as they were known, controlling almost all aspects of life within Russia and its empire. The vast majority of the Russian population were lower class, many of whom were factory workers who suffered long days working for little pay. Russia was becoming an increasingly capitalist nation due to the increased emphasis on heavy industry within the country, paired with the increased trade with their neighbours. From about the early 1880s to the time of the revolution, they were also going through a kind of industrial revolution, a later one than most of their European neighbours, but that saw a large increase in factory workers. And workers weren't seeing the benefits of this new capitalist Russia. Trade unions were banned, political parties were forbidden, and the workers were becoming increasingly frustrated about their lack of prospects, and if anything, just a better chance at life, or a chance for a better life. In Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto of 1848, a key element of it was the increased power of the proletariat, which at the time would have increased Marx's feeling within the country, as they saw that what Marx was saying could be possible. Service in his book also talks of the importance of the intellectuals in the country, who he states believed that the absolute monarchy was the primordial cause of the country's ills. So it was across the board discontent with the Tsar, Nicholas II. He'd attempted to appease these frustrated workers 12 years before, during the failed 1905 revolution, when he released the October Manifesto. This promised Russians a parliament, which was named the Duma, whilst also guaranteeing all citizens civil liberties. Many of the issues which sparked the 1905 revolution were still at play 12 years later. Low wages and poor working conditions, lack of opportunity. Some of the main critics of the government remained the same as well. These included Bolsheviks, who Lenin was amongst their ranks, not as prominent in 1905 as he later becomes, and also other groups such as the Mensheviks, who had Trotsky within their ranks, who the revolutionary Lunacharsky claims was close allies to the Bolsheviks even in this period, or closer perhaps than most other Mensheviks at the time. Yeah, and both Trotsky and Lenin do become very important later on. And following 1905, these men were forced, along with many others who were part of their groups, were forced into exile from Russia, fleeing to other parts of Europe for the decades that followed. The decade that followed, should I say. Okay, so now we'll fast forward 12 years to February 1917. The population of Russia, namely in the capital at the time, Petrograd, which is now known as St. Petersburg, was still frustrated for the same reasons behind the failed revolution, yet they were now being paired with the catastrophic consequences of the First World War and the debt and food shortages that came with it. Similarities can most certainly be drawn between the reasons for this revolution and the revolution of France in 1789, where a widening economic gap between the classes and the huge cost of supporting the American Revolution created widespread discontent within the country. Fitzpatrick, in his book The Russian Revolution, puts emphasis on the food shortages, which led to deteriorating living conditions as a key trigger of the revolution. The actual events of the February Revolution, as it's known, were rather spontaneous. They came as the biggest factory in Petrograd. Its workers went on strike, and over the course of the next week were joined by thousands and thousands more workers before the soldiers from garrisons stationed in Petrograd eventually joined the movement after initially being ordered to fire on these protesters. But most of the actual soldiers from Russia were fighting in World War One, so the soldiers stationed in Petrograd were amateur at best. So yeah, a week after the protest started, Nicholas II had fled. He was in hiding, and a provisional government was formed, made up of centre-left liberals and the more socialist Petrograd Worker Group. In the months following February, revolutionaries and socialists involved in the 1905 revolution began flooding back into Russia, and it's namely into Petrograd. Amongst these were Lenin, and numerous other dissidents. Lenin immediately began appealing to Bolsheviks in Petrograd that an overthrow of the provisional government was necessary. By July, Bolsheviks had taken to the streets, culminating in what are known as the July Days. However, these protests were quashed, and Lenin, due to the fact that they were quashed, became a wanted man, fleeing to Finland. The months that followed saw fears of a possible military coup within Russia against the new provisional government, and this, in a sense, spurred change within the leading parties, but also, I guess, it gave Lenin a sense of that things could change if he had the power to do so. But yeah, the Petrograd Workers' Party has now changed its leader to Trotsky, who, since 1905, although still favourable to the Bolsheviks in 1905, had become even more so. In October, Lenin returned once again to Petrograd, where he met with the Bolshevik Central Committee and agreed upon a plan to topple the provisional government. They enacted the plan seizing key transport links and other important aspects of the city of Petrograd before marching on the Winter Palace, taking it over and arresting the leaders of the provisional government, but not the workers, the Petrograd Worker Party. Despite Lenin's prominence in the revolution, he in fact preferred that Trotsky become the leader of the new Soviet government, but was dissuaded by prominent Bolsheviks and eventually took the role. And so Lenin was now in control of Russia. Opposition was definitely apparent as soon as they took over, with a civil war breaking out almost immediately and millions of lives being lost in the process. The war was fought between clearly the ruling Bolshevik Party and their Red Army, and a White Army made up of opposition from forces all across the political spectrum. The Bolsheviks eventually came out victorious, and Lenin and the party consolidated his power over the former Russian Empire, which became the Soviet Union. The first communist state had been established, and in the decades that followed, grew to become a global superpower only to be matched by the United States.